My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 32 years old, and I built my architecture firm from nothing from a studio apartment with a secondhand drafting table and a laptop with a cracked screen. I did it quietly, without fanfare, without anyone in my family noticing or caring. And tonight, I'm standing in the back corner of my cousin's engagement party, holding a glass of sparkling water I haven't touched, watching my best friend of 12 years laugh loudly at the center of the room wearing the dress. I helped her pick out the same dress she wore the night she stole everything from me. She doesn't know what's coming. Neither does my cousin. Neither does anyone in this room, actually, except for the man who just texted me from the parking lot. 2 minutes out. Say the word. I type back one word. Ready. I set down my glass. My hands are completely still. People always assume that women who've been hurt fall apart. They expect tears, confrontation, a scene at a family dinner. They expect you to beg for acknowledgement. What they don't expect is silence. What they don't expect is a woman who spent 18 months building something they cannot touch, standing in the room where they humiliated her, waiting without blinking. That's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. Eventually, you learn to use it. Let me take you back to where this started. 18 months ago, I had a business partner named Megan. We'd been best friends since the first day of college, two architecture students who bonded over bad campus coffee and worse professors. We graduated together, got our licenses together, and 5 years ago, we co-founded Donovan Price Design out of a shared office space in downtown Austin that smelled like old carpet and ambition. I handled structural design and client relations. Megan handled visual concepts and presentations. We were good. Not just good people, called us the best boutique residential firm in Central Texas under 10 years old. What I didn't know was that Megan had been having dinner with my cousin Ryan for 4 months before I found out. Ryan, who I had introduced her to at my grandmother's 75th birthday. Ryan, who I had described to her over coffee as my favorite person in the family, the only one who ever showed up. Ryan, who she had looked at across the table that Sunday afternoon and apparently decided, was the next piece of her plan. I found out about them the same way I found out about everything Megan did that she didn't want me to know by accident too late, when the decision had already been made without me. It was a Tuesday in October. I came back to the office early from a site visit because the contractor had rescheduled. The main lights were off, but Megan's desk lamp was on, which was normal. What wasn't normal was the open folder on her monitor, our client folder for the Hargrove account. The Hargrove account was our largest active project at the time. A complete estate renovation in the Hill Country for a developer named Thomas Hargrove, worth $460,000 in fees. I leaned over to move the mouse and wake the screen, and I saw the email draft. It was addressed to Thomas Hargrove directly. It was written in Megan's name only. It referred to the project as her vision, her design philosophy, her proposed timeline. There was no mention of Donovan Price Design. There was no mention of me. At the bottom, she had written, "I'm in the process of launching my own studio and would be honored to continue this project under Price Design Group." I read it 3 times. The third time, I noticed the date stamp. She had been drafting variations of this email for 11 weeks. I didn't cry. I didn't pick up the phone and call her. I did what I always do when I need to think clearly. I sat down, opened a blank document, and started writing everything I knew. I went home that night, and I didn't sleep. I lay on my back on the hardwood floor of my living room because the bed felt too soft for what I was carrying. The ceiling fan turned above me in slow, indifferent circles. I kept thinking about the Hargrove files, about how many times Megan and I had sat together in that office, refining those drawings, debating material choices, adjusting load-bearing calculations. I had done 60% of the structural work. My name was on the permit applications. My license was attached to the plans. And she had been quietly erasing me for nearly 3 months. The next morning, I said nothing to Megan. I came in, made coffee, asked how her evening was. She said fine. I said fine. We worked side by side for 6 hours, and I watched her the way you watch someone you are reassessing from the ground up, every small habit suddenly charged with new meaning. The way she saved files under her own name first. The way she forwarded client emails to her personal account for easy access. The way she laughed when I mentioned a contact at a development firm we'd been hoping to approach. I had been looking at the surface of a person for 12 years, without ever looking at the structure underneath. That Friday, I called our attorney. I had our partnership agreement reviewed line by line. I documented every project where my license was the primary credential. I began quietly archiving my original design files to an external drive, not to steal anything, but because what is mine needed to be clearly labeled as mine before someone else could claim the fog. I told nobody, not my mother, not Ryan, not anyone from our friend group. I just worked. 3 weeks later, Megan came into the office on a Monday morning with her shoulders back and her eyes bright in the way she always looked when she had already won an argument in her head before having it out loud. She told me she was leaving the partnership. She told me she had already notified 3 of our active clients, including Hargrove, and that she intended to continue those projects independently. She told me she had already signed a lease on a new office space. She was very calm, very professional, and very rehearsed. Then she said, "I think you know this has been coming, Claire. You're brilliant at the technical side, but let's be honest, clients respond to me. The vision is mine. You've always been more of a support role. A support role, 12 years of friendship, 5 years of co-ownership, my license on every permit, my calculations in every wall. A support role." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "Okay." She blinked. She had expected tears, or anger, or pleading. The okay threw her completely. "That's it?" she said. "I'll have the partnership dissolution documents to you by end of week," I said. I turned back to my monitor. She stood there for another few seconds, waiting for something I refused to give her. Then she picked up her bag and left. The moment the door closed, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 3 weeks. Then I picked up my phone and called the one person who had been waiting to hear from me. His name was David Chen. He was a contract litigation attorney, and he had been reviewing my documentation for 2 weeks. When I told him Megan had made her move, he said, "Good. Now we move too." What Megan had not accounted for, and what I had spent those 3 weeks quietly ensuring, was that her new firm could not legally operate on any of our joint projects without my sign-off. My professional license was the credential of record on 6 active permits. Without my cooperation, those projects could not legally proceed. Thomas Hargrove, upon being informed of this by his own legal team, withdrew his commitment to Price Design Group within 48 hours. Megan called me 4 times that week. I let it go to voicemail. The partnership dissolved cleanly. I retained the firm name Donovan Price, became Donovan Design, and I retained the 3 clients who mattered most, including one who referred me to a commercial developer I hadn't been able to reach on my own. Within 2 months, I had more work than I'd had in the final year of the partnership. But Megan didn't disappear. She moved across town, she opened her studio, and she kept building a version of events where she was the visionary who had outgrown a dead weight. I heard it secondhand through mutual friends. I heard it at industry events I attended without flinching. I heard it, eventually, from my own family because somewhere in those months, Ryan had fallen for her version of the story the same way he'd fallen for her in general, completely and without asking questions. My aunt called me in February to tell me Ryan and Megan were serious. She said it like a warning, the way people deliver news they know will land badly. I thanked her for telling me and got off the phone in under 2 minutes. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time after that call. I want to be honest about what those months were like, because people who tell these stories often skip the part where it was genuinely hard. The part where you drive home on a Wednesday night with no particular reason to feel sad and you feel it anyway, heavy and sourceless, filling the car. The part where you see a building you designed and instead of pride, you feel a kind of grief, because the person you thought was building it with you was never really there. I had a therapist named Dr. Sandra Wells who I'd been seeing for other reasons, and I kept seeing her through all of this. She had a habit of asking me to name exactly what I'd lost. Not generally, but specifically. One week, I said I'd lost my business partner. She waited. I said I'd lost my best friend. She waited again. Eventually, I said what was actually true. I had lost the version of myself that trusted people without verifying. The version that assumed that someone who sat across from you for 12 years and called you family was actually building something real. Dr. Wells said, that version of you wasn't wrong to trust. She was just trusting someone who didn't deserve it. That's a fact about Megan, not a flaw in you. I wrote that down. I kept it on a sticky note on my monitor for 6 months. What pulled me back to myself wasn't a single moment. It was accumulation. It was the client who called at 7 a.m. because she was so excited about the kitchen revision I'd sent the night before. It was the morning I drove past a house on South Congress and recognized the roofline as mine. something I designed 2 years ago that I'd forgotten was finished, and I pulled over and just looked at it for a full minute because it was standing, solid and real, the way good work stands. It was my team, 4 people I'd hired carefully, one at a time, who showed up every day and did their jobs and trusted me to lead. I started running in the mornings. Not for discipline. I've never been the kind of person who needs to be told to be disciplined, but because I needed 1 hour each day where the only thing required of me was to move forward. 6 a.m. The trail along the greenbelt. The city still dark and quiet. It became the most honest part of my day. And then, about 8 months after the dissolution, I walked into a planning commission meeting for a mixed-use development in East Austin, and I sat down across the conference table from a man named James Whitfield. James was the lead investor and project director for Whitfield Development Group. He was 41, quiet in meetings in the way that people are quiet when they're paying attention to everything rather than waiting for their turn to talk. He wore no flashy watch. His suit was understated and fit perfectly. When I presented my structural concept for the residential component of his project, he did not look at his phone once. When I finished, he said, "You anticipated a load distribution problem on the northeast corner that my structural engineer missed. How long ago did you catch that?" I said, "First time I walked the site." He looked at me for a moment, then he said, "I'd like to talk more after this." We had coffee, then dinner again. James was not a man who performed wealth. He simply moved through the world with the quiet assurance of someone who had built something real and no longer needed to prove it. He had started Whitfield Development from a single duplex in his mid-20s. Now his firm handled projects across 4 states. He drove a sensible car. He cooked at home most nights. He called his mother on Sunday mornings. On our 4th date, I told him about Megan and the partnership. I told him the full version, not the edited one. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "She underestimated you. That's the most expensive mistake a business person can make." I laughed, actually laughed, the kind that comes from relief rather than humor. He wasn't rescuing me. I want to be clear about that. I had already rebuilt my firm by the time I met him. I had already done the work. James didn't arrive in time to save anything. He arrived after the battle. When I was standing in the field, I had cleared myself. And he looked around at what I'd built and said, without drama, without performance, "I'd like to stay, if that's all right." 6 months later, he asked me to marry him in the kitchen of his house on a Sunday morning while we were making breakfast. No speech, no audience. He slid a ring across the counter, a round brilliant diamond set in plain platinum, no fuss, and said, "I want to do this right. Will you?" I said yes before he finished the sentence. We didn't post it online. We told family in person. Quietly, one at a time. I told my parents. I told my aunt. My aunt told Ryan. Ryan apparently told Megan. And that's what brought me to tonight. Ryan and Megan's engagement party was held at a rented event space in the domain-neutral territory, which I suspect was Megan's choice. She was deliberate that way. The venue was all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of aesthetic that photographs well and costs more than it should. I had debated whether to come. James had said, "Without pressure, whatever you decide, I'm with you." My therapist had asked me what I hoped to feel when I left. I thought about it honestly and said, "Done. I want to feel done." So I came. I arrived alone, 20 minutes after the party started, in a navy dress that I had bought for a client dinner last fall. I had not done anything elaborate. I wore my engagement ring. I wore the same lip color I'd been wearing for years, a deep plum that Megan had once told me was too severe for my face. I had stopped taking that note approximately 11 months ago. I found my aunt near the drink table and hugged her. I found my cousin Ryan and congratulated him. And I meant it. Ryan is genuinely a good person who had been told a story and believed it, and I didn't hold that against him the way I held it against the person who told the story. Megan saw me come in. I watched her register my presence across the room, a small recalibration, quickly covered. She smiled at someone near her and laughed a little louder. I found a spot near the back wall and I stayed there, watching, holding my water. 40 minutes in, she came to me. She crossed the room with the particular confidence of a woman in her home territory. And she touched my arm lightly when she reached me, the way people do when they want to establish physical authority while performing friendliness. "Claire," she said. "I'm so glad you came. I wasn't sure you would." Congratulations, I said. The venue is beautiful. She tilted her head. You look good. You seem settled. The word settled was doing a lot of work in that sentence. It was the word you choose when you mean diminished but want to sound generous. I am, I said simply. She glanced at my ring. Her eyes moved quickly, that quick professional assessment she always made of everything, and I watched her calibrate it. It was a significant ring, not ostentatious, but significant. I heard you've been seeing someone, she said. I'm engaged, I said. She blinked. Oh. Ryan didn't mention. He found out recently, I said. She recovered quickly. Well, that's wonderful. Who is he? Someone in the industry? Before I could answer, my aunt appeared at my elbow with Ryan. And Ryan said, Claire, you have to meet some of Megan's colleagues from the firm. And the moment dissolved into the ordinary choreography of a party. But I saw it. That half second where Megan's face had done something uncontrolled. Around 9 o'clock, Ryan tapped his glass for a toast. The room quieted. He gave a short, genuine speech about Megan that made 3 people near me tear up because Ryan, whatever his blind spots, is sincere. Megan stood beside him with her hand in his and her face composed in the particular expression she wore when she was being publicly admired. Then she added a few words of her own. She thanked the guests. She thanked her colleagues from Price Design Group, her firm, she said, built from scratch on her own vision. She thanked Ryan's family for welcoming her. She did not look at me when she said built from scratch on her own vision. But everyone else in the room did. I kept my face completely neutral. I raised my glass with everyone else. And then my phone buzzed in my clutch. In the lot. Ready when you are. I typed back, come in. 2 minutes passed. I stood near the edge of the room, watching the door. James Whitfield does not make entrances. He is not that kind of man. He simply walked in from the parking lot in a charcoal jacket and dark trousers. Found my face in the room immediately. He always found me immediately. I had noticed this early, and found it quietly extraordinary, and walked toward me through the party the way water finds its level. Unhurried. Certain. He reached me, touched the small of my back, and said, Sorry I'm late. The Riverside meeting ran over. It's fine, I said. He kissed my temple, then looked up at the room with the calm, assessing gaze he brought to every space he entered. The gaze that had identified a load distribution flaw in a building he'd owned for 6 weeks. Ryan spotted him first. I watched my cousin's face change, not dramatically, but in the way faces change when a reference point shifts. Ryan knew who James Whitfield was. Anyone in Texas real estate development knew who James Whitfield was. Claire, Ryan said carefully, crossing toward us. This is James, I said. My fiancé. They shook hands. Ryan looked between us once, and I saw him begin to revise something. Megan reached us 90 seconds later. I will give her credit for composure. She had more of it than most people would in that moment. She extended her hand to James and said, Megan Price. This is my engagement party. Congratulations on your own engagement. I just heard. James shook her hand. Congratulations to you as well. There was a beat. Then Megan said, with the smooth confidence of someone who has been in professional rooms her whole career, Whitfield Development. We actually submitted a proposal for your 6th Street project last year. Price Design Group. James nodded slowly. I remember the submission. We didn't get the call back, she said, a slight smile, professional gracious. No, James said. You didn't. Pause. The proposal had strong visual concepts, he continued, but the structural analysis had significant gaps. My team flagged liability concerns. He said it without edge, the way he would have said it in any debrief. Factual. Clean. I believe we passed our feedback to the submitting firm. Megan's smile stayed in place, but something behind it shifted. I wasn't aware of specific feedback. It would have gone to the principal of record, James said simply. He glanced at me. Claire, do you want anything from the bar? He wasn't performing. He wasn't landing a blow deliberately. He was simply being himself, precise, clear, without cruelty, and the truth in what he said was doing its own work without him needing to push it. We excused ourselves. At the bar, James leaned close and said quietly, Was that her? That was her, I said. He was quiet for a moment. She's good at the surface, he said. You can tell she's practiced it. He paused. You're not. Not what? Practiced, he said. What you are is real. There's a difference. And it's the thing that made me trust your work before I trusted anything else about you. I looked at him. He wasn't saying it to be kind. He was saying it because it was accurate, and he was a person who said accurate things. I picked up my glass. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me," he said. "It's just true." We didn't stay much longer, another 40 minutes, long enough to be courteous. I said a real goodbye to Ryan and hugged my aunt. I did not seek out Megan again, and she did not seek out me. In the parking lot, James held the door of his car open and I got in. He came around to the driver's side, started the engine. The night air through the cracked window smelled like cedar, and approaching rain, that specific Central Texas smell that means the temperature is about to drop. He didn't say anything, he just drove. After a while I said, "I want to tell you something." "Okay. I've been waiting for tonight to feel like something," I said. "Like vindication. Or closure. Or I don't know. Something large." He glanced over. "It doesn't feel large," I said. "It just feels finished." He nodded. "That's better than large," he said. I thought about that. Outside the window, the highway lights passed in a steady rhythm. We were heading back toward the east side, toward the house we had been slowly making into something that was ours. The house with the half-finished back porch that James was rebuilding himself, board by board. On weekend mornings, I thought about the office on South Congress, where I had started over with 4 people and a blank firm name. I thought about Dr. Wells asking me to name exactly what I'd lost, and the night I'd finally said the true thing. Not the business, not the friendship, but the version of myself that didn't know yet what I was made of. I knew now. I'd found out the hard way, in the best possible way, by being left alone in the middle of something difficult and discovering that I could finish it. There's a thing that people don't tell you about rebuilding from a betrayal. They tell you about the anger and the grief and the moment the other person finally gets what's coming to them. What they don't tell you about is the quiet. The ordinary Wednesday morning when you're reviewing drawings and you realize that you are genuinely, without performance, okay. That the thing that was taken from you didn't turn out to be the load-bearing wall you thought it was. That you rebuilt the structure anyway, and it's standing, and it's yours. I got home that night, and I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a moment, before taking off my earrings. The woman looking back at me wasn't the one who had sat on her kitchen floor at 2 a.m., reading a forwarded email and understanding, word by word, the shape of her own blindness. She wasn't the one who had driven to work the next morning pretending nothing had changed while building her defense in silence. She was someone who had moved through all of that and come out the other side with her work intact, her name on her firm, a ring on her finger, and most importantly, the clear-eyed certainty that she had built everything that mattered herself. Megan could have the version of events where she was the visionary. She could have the party and the venue and the audience. Some people need an audience. Some people build their entire lives around maintaining the performance of success for the people watching. I've never been that kind of person. I build structures that stand whether or not anyone is looking at them. That's the difference between us. That's always been the difference. The next morning I was up at 6. The trail was cool and damp, the greenbelt still dark between the trees. I ran my usual route, the one that curves along the creek and comes out at the ridge where, on clear mornings, you can see the Austin skyline catching the first light from the east. I didn't think about Megan. I didn't think about the party. I thought about the Riverside project, and a structural question I'd been turning over for 3 days, and the sound the trail makes when it's slightly wet, and the way the air tastes at the point in a run when your body stops protesting and just moves. At the top of the ridge, I stopped for a moment and looked at the city. Everything I had built was somewhere in that skyline. Walls I had calculated. Rooms where people were sleeping right now. Safe inside something I had made strong enough to hold. Foundations dug from ground that I had stood on and assessed before anyone drove the first stake. That work was mine, not because I defended it. Because I did it. I put my earbuds back in and turned for home. If you've been underestimated by someone you trusted, if you've sat with the particular loneliness of watching someone take credit for what you built, I want you to hear this. The best answer you can give them is not a confrontation. It's not a speech at a party. It's the work. It's the thing that stands after they've moved on to the next story they're telling about themselves. Build it. Let it stand. The right people will know whose name is on it. If this story sat with you, leave me a comment and tell me about a time you kept going when it would have been easier to stop. I read everyone. And if you're new here, subscribe to Picked Revenge, because every week we tell stories about the people who chose to build instead of break. I'll see you in the next one.